Well, welcome everyone to our webinar series. So kicking off today with the content marketing strategy. Today will be hosted by Bosco Anthony, our digital director, and Mark Henderson, our director of media relations. So it's my pleasure to hand you guys over to them very shortly, but before I do, I have a couple of housekeeping items to run through. So today, if I could ask if everyone's mics remain on mute, and you're welcome to keep your cameras off as well. If you do have any questions that arise during the presentation, please feel free to type them into the chat box, and we'll have a question section at the end where Bosco and Mark will be available to answer any of your questions. We'll also be posting this webinar video via YouTube, as well as a slide deck online in the near future. So if there's anything that you miss, please don't stress. We'll be able to share this with you as well. So today, as I said, it's my pleasure to hand you over to Bosco and Mark to speak through content marketing strategy, the exciting things that can be done with a really effective content marketing strategy, and some of the secret tips and tricks that can really help you execute a great strategy. So I'm going to hand over to Bosco.
So again, good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here, and we're excited to deliver our first webinar series on how to develop a content strategy. I'm joined with Mark, and we're both going to be sharing our insights from a digital and a traditional PR and communication perspective, and we've got a great case study as well. If I sound funny, it's just because I have a Canadian accent and I'm originally from Canada. And yeah, so I'm now calling Australia home, and I'm excited to be with Elevate Communication. So thank you for joining us. And we're going to start off with the purpose of our strategy today, which is designing a content strategy. And in my time being a digital strategist, it's really exciting because we've typically seen a few changes in tactics, but the strategy has stayed the same fairly for the last few years. And so what I'd like to do is to get everyone to evaluate their own content strategy and identify what your strengths are and where are the areas where you could build on operational maturity. And so there's 8 critical steps to designing a content strategy. And what I'm going to share with you is the most critical step in this 8-process wheel. And this is where you can tell us if you're struggling with this particular step, or this is a step that you've actually nailed in the last few years as well. So the first thing we have to look at the content strategy is identifying the purpose of your campaign and making sure that all the pieces and all the people are aligned to that purpose. Is it a campaign that you're trying to build awareness on? Is it a campaign that you're trying to build on conversion metrics? And these are important questions to ask because there's different pieces that feed that purpose. So if you're trying to build a campaign for awareness, the objectives and the tactics may be very different from when you're trying to send traffic to get conversion. And one of the entities that we look at after we build on a purpose is doing the research to identify if you have the capabilities and the right audience and you're speaking to the right audience to get that traction. Things like keyword research are really important if you're working on writing pieces and hoping to get organic content. We're also looking to see if we're speaking to the right audience and we're speaking to the right people. We're targeting the right media. So research is so important because it saves you time when it's time to execute on that particular process. The third step in this particular strategy is curating the content. And there's different types of curation. There's research content, there's content that you're going to write on, and there's content that you're going to pick up, whether it's facts or you're looking at case studies. And so building on this content and building an editorial calendar is just as important after you've curated that content. So I'm a big fan of preparation, and at Elevate Communication, we're really big on preparing content, making sure that we have the briefs for the content, because without these pieces, these critical steps, your execution could fail or your execution couldn't perform the way you would want it to be. Another layer of content today is the creative aspect. And essentially, we're now living in a world that's visual, it's audible, it's textual. If anyone listens to the Joe Rogan podcast, he just sold his podcast and moved from YouTube to Spotify for over $100 million. And, you know, we're starting to see changes in how the world is reacting to content. We're also seeing people working from home due to current times. And so, you know, it's not just traditional content anymore. People are now absorbing content through their iPhones. They're looking at content through video, visual means, or audible means. So it's important to repurpose your content because there's different ways and different channels where people can absorb this content. Now, I'm going to share with you the secret sauce. And the secret sauce really is this next step, which is distribution. And it's a topic that not many companies or agencies or people will talk about because distribution is an integrated, holistic way of doing marketing, whether it's digital or traditional marketing. And so we've got a great case study that we're going to share with you today as well on how we were able to leverage both distribution from a digital perspective as well as a traditional marketing perspective as well. And so when we're talking about distribution, it's about getting content distributed to various channels, but also making sure you empower that content, whether it's through paid media or working with influencers. And we're going to talk a little bit about this particular step. And I'm excited to talk about this step because I've spent a lot of time and a lot of experience working on digital distribution. So lots of experience in this area. Now, once you've spent time distributing your content, we then move to a stage where we start to look at the metrics. And when we look at the metrics, we then identify where the challenges are or what are the areas that require tweaking. And a favorite mentor of mine once said that metrics is almost like a crime scene. It tells you where the crime started, and your role is to identify how to optimize that particular area of challenge. So it could be that you're sending traffic to a website, but when they land on the website, they're not getting that message or that experience. And if that's the case, then we may have to optimize the way the website looks or the copywriting on the website. It could be the fact that the advertising or the ad isn't really resonating with the people. It could also be the fact that you're approaching the wrong journalist or you're approaching the wrong media. And Mark's going to share his experience on that as well. And so once we look at the metrics, we then move to a critical stage of how to optimize this content and how to make it look better. And sometimes these are minor tweaks. These are tweaks on a website. Sometimes these are areas where we end up having different ways we can change the lens of how we do marketing. Now, I'm just curious, for all our attendees today, if anyone here wants to look at this eight process wheel, I'm just curious from the chat box, which process that you are really confident of and you're doing really well, and which process do you feel you could do better? So I'll move on to the next slide, but if you guys could just take a quick look here and just throw us a comment in the chat box. We're just curious to know what is the one step that you do really well and what is the one step that you could do better? Just curious to hear that out. And Jeremy will monitor that for us as well. Okay, so we've got some comments, Jeremy, as well. We can save that for the Q&A. So the next step is distribution, and I call this the many faces of content distribution. And distribution is an area where you get your content recognized. You get your copywriting and your digital content or your traditional content even amplified even more. And so a favorite quote for me that I learned very young is, don't plan to be viral, plan to be awesome.
So start every single day.
Yes, that's how you start every single day. And it's also how we do digital as well and how we do marketing is don't plan to be viral, plan to be awesome. And when you can be awesome, things get a lot better over time. So it's really important for you to consider that when it comes to where you want to go and achieving your digital objectives. So we're going to go through the different phases of content distribution and the many phases of how we can amplify this content. So let's start off with the influence points. In this world, we have macro influences, we have micro influences. The big difference is a macro influencer could be a celebrity or could be someone with a bigger scale. A micro influencer is someone that might have a targeted niche or someone that essentially might be specialized in one specific area, and that's what they're passionate about. We're looking at connectors, we're looking at journalists, we're looking at personal networks, professional networks. And this really is your first circle of influence. Now, as you start to grow on this influence, we have what we call the tribe, and it could be the marketing tribe, the digital tribe. These are online communities. Facebook and LinkedIn have private communities or public communities. You have digital groups, you have email lists, social networks, you have followers and campaigns. And this is the second circle of influence because you're closely connected to this circle. Now, as you move on and as you start to go through the circles, we get to the third step, and this is where we start to expose our message even further. And this is when you belong to partnerships, or you have sponsors, you have affiliations, we have exposure points, we have guest posts, or we have content that's ranking through search engines. Now, this influence is where the marketing begins because you're now moving from your comfort zone to an area that's untapped, or it's basically an exposure point that you may not have access to. A great example for this is, let's say you are connected to an event and they give you a speaker slot. You can now take your message and share that message on the global stage. If you're partnered with someone that has an email list and they send an email out to their list, you're now tapping into their digital assets and their fans. And so that third circle of leverage really allows you to go from basic content to elevating your content to get even more eyeballs. And the fourth step is what we call the exposure point. And this is when your content starts to get syndicated. It starts to get awesome. It starts to get viral. This is when we start using paid media, digital media, social media. We start to work with associations, media outlets, digital publishers. And then in the coming slides, I'm going to share an example of a case study where we were able to tap into all four circles. So I'm excited to share that story with you as well. And as Jeremy had mentioned at the start of the webinar, please send us your questions as well, because we would love to answer these as well after the webinar. So we have 5 different examples here on how we were able to distribute content. And so if anyone's never heard of this case study, this is the Ugly Christmas Sweater Party. And this was an initiative that started in Canada. And it basically started off with two sets of brothers who were really close friends that wanted to come together to raise funds for a little girl that had a tumor. And her wish was to learn how to surf. So they decided to throw a house party, and their wish was to raise funds to send her to Hawaii so that she could learn how to surf. This house party had a theme, which was ugly Christmas sweaters, which has been a theme that's been going on since the 60s. And typically your grandma would stitch together some patches and put together an ugly Christmas sweater. And so the theme was an ugly Christmas house party, and they raised enough funds. They sent her to Hawaii. She learned how to surf. There's a picture of her, and a few months later, she lost her battle to cancer. So in her name and in her memory, they decided to build a nonprofit group, and they basically decided to power wishes for the Children's Wish Foundation and the Make-A-Wish Foundation. I was brought on as a digital strategist as the brand started to mature, and I had to come up with creative ways to build digital collateral and take this content and further expose it past their network. So here's 5 examples of how we were able to tap into traditional media as well as digital media. And this is Mark's wheelhouse as well. So we were trying to think about how to pitch a story to the media. And, you know, we wanted to go past the 2 events. We had a marathon that raised funds, and we had a Christmas party. As you can see in the bottom left and right corners, there's people wearing toques, and that was for the marathon, and there's people on the left celebrating the Christmas party. But we really wanted to tap into the media and come up with a creative way for us to build exposure. And it couldn't be a pitch that said, hey, let's sell some tickets to raise some funds. We had to think outside the box. So the story we pitched to the journalist and the TV media people was, hey, let's do a morning fashion show with the ugly Christmas sweater on the breakfast television show. So if you look on the right-hand side, the 2 founders, Jordan and Chris, who are amazing people, they've actually written a book that they're publishing soon on the ugly Christmas sweater phenomenon. They basically pitched a fashion show on the breakfast television show. The publication team really loved the idea, and within a couple of weeks, we had a fashion show on primetime TV between 8 to 9. Now, as a strategist, we had to be prepared for that because we had to make sure that the websites were ready to handle the traffic. We had to make sure we could take orders. We had to make sure that we could sell tickets for these events and raise funds to our merchandise store. And so it was an intricate back-end process that supported the front end. And what was really cool was the fact that we noticed as soon as this television segment hit, we had a ton of mobile traffic because a lot of people were going into work. That whole week, we started getting traffic to the website and the sales just bumped up. But if we weren't ready for this traffic, if we weren't ready for this launch, this could have gone sideways. Now, the beauty about this is that we then started getting picked up into other news outlets. The Huffington Post, which is a big digital publisher in North America, talked about the origins of the ugly Christmas sweater, and there's an article about that as well. And so when it comes to marketing, the best advice I can give you is every day is launch day. Every day is an opportunity for you to do better when it comes to marketing. And so what I'm really excited about is to learn about the processes that elevate communication, because we're really big on preparing our clients and really making sure that they're ready for those exposure points. And in this particular case, I wanted to give you different ideas of how digital really paired up and was married with the traditional forms of marketing. We even had a sponsor, Peril 49, that basically had a beer named after us, the Ugly Sweater beer. And we also had the hockey teams affiliate with us. So during the hockey games, during the break, we had a bunch of people from the Ugly group come down and drive the Zamboni, and also have the hockey players wear ugly sweaters as part of this campaign. Now, the key critical thing was we collected a lot of pieces in the first year, and we were able to repurpose this content for 3 years and sustain our marketing initiatives for 3 years after this first year of launch. And so all I can tell you is that marketing is constantly evolving. You have to think about the long game. You have to think about moving forward, and it's not just about one launch. Marketing and specifically content marketing is a commitment. It's not a campaign. So, you know, I'm gonna pass this on to Mark very soon, but I want to end with what are the current trends in this content narrative? What are some of the key areas right now that we're seeing in this world, especially since our whole world went upside down in the last few months? So what's really big for us right now? The first thing is we're living in a world full of conversion, and conversion goes beyond your marketing message. It goes back to your website. It goes back to how your applications work together. And so the message you speak and the message you say online and the message you present online is so important to help with that conversion. Moving forward, the context of the message goes beyond a marketing message. People are looking for authenticity, and people are looking for meaningfulness now more than ever before, because there's so much content out there. Your content has to stand out. We're in a world right now where there's so much out there, so we have to think about amplification. We have to think about going outside the box, whether it's paid media, whether it's traditional mediums, whether it's stories, whether it's integrating all of these campaigns together. We are now at a stage where marketing has become more holistic now than ever before. Segmentation of your data is so important. Here's a great example. I went to a spa 3 years ago, and within 2 weeks, I started getting emails from this spa. But here's the challenge. They assumed that I was a regular customer, and in this case, I was a female demographic. So they sent me emails selling me feminine products. Here's the challenge. I would have gladly purchased products if they had spoken to me as a man and had sold me male products. The problem was the data wasn't properly segmented. Now, if you are like me and you binged on Netflix, you notice these days you get an email from Netflix that says, hey, would you like to see shows like the one you just watched? This is called dynamic content, and this is when companies customize their campaigns based on your behavior. So if you're watching a bunch of horror flicks, you're going to get alternatives to other horror flicks. If you're watching documentaries, you're getting alternatives to those documentaries. So if you are selling massive products or you're observing the behavior of your audience, you could speak to them based on that behavior. Moving forward, we are all about digital presence. And there's an old wise saying that says the best place to hide a treasure or a dead body is on page 2 of Google. And the reason why is because nobody goes to page 2 of Google. So it's all about ranking today. And so it's really important to have a holistic content strategy so that it's not just about marketing. So having updated blogs, having updated vlogs, repurposing your content, telling the search engines that you are a media house is so important as a brand now than ever before. And let's not forget, we're living in a visual world. So it's a textual, visual, and audible world. Are you repurposing the content that you're producing? And if you're not, that's great, because this is why we're here. So that covers a little bit about the digital trends. I'm going to be looking forward to answering your questions when we get to the Q&A section, but I'm now going to pass you off to Mark, who's got some amazing ideas on how to craft a story, and tell us a little bit about traditional marketing.
No, well, look, thank you so much, Bosco. And sorry, everyone, about my accent. You just had a lovely chat to listening to Bosco. And now you get to listen to me as I've come just off the farm out of Coonabarabran or something like that. But look, I want to jump in and talk a little bit about traditional PR and media and what we do there, and how this all sort of builds on and sells into the same thing that is digital. Just before I kick off, I want to read just a little piece that I thought gives a nice introduction, because I think as PR people, we're often called spin doctors, or we are considered people who try to sort of convert you or persuade you, I think is a key word. So I just want to jump in and tell you a little bit about what we do and what we really are. So as PR people, it is our job to share information with media, social commentators, audiences, and publics about certain companies, brands, research, information, and a whole range of extra subject matter that might interest them. We do this with the intention to provide value to the public, and our role as professional communicators requires that we often make complicated or detailed subject matter digestible. We provide images, vision, key messages, access to spokespeople, as well as content and information to influencers to detail why our story, our client's story, your story is newsworthy or of value to them. We provide them with as much information as we can and then work with them to tell the whole story. This is how we persuade them. There is no trickery or magic, but delivery of facts, provision of information, and access to the materials they need to accurately tell the story. Now that comes from a blog post called Persuasion and its Role in PR, and the author's name appears to be the same name as myself. So that one is available on the Elevate website. That's called Persuasion and its Role in PR. It just talks a little bit about what we do. But look, jumping into it, I want to talk about the importance of a story angle and how we craft that. In every business, there's going to be highlights, and some of these will be a huge deal to you internally. But looking beyond and outside of your business or your company or whatever your story piece is, it's important to consider, will these be a big deal to the community at large? Every time I consider a story, I ask myself a few questions. Firstly, what's the strongest angle or hook that I want to share with the media? Is there a hook that will be relevant to the media? Do the media need a release for this pitch, or is this something you can call up and talk to them about? If you are going to write a release, what's the tone of the release? What is the headline? I think the headline is really key for everything. You should know that really quickly if it is a newsworthy piece. How are you going to open this and engage people? The first line is going to engage people, so make sure that line is engaging. And then what is your call to action? What's the purpose of telling this story? Considering all of those things, if you do have some of that and you really do think there is relevance in speaking with the media, I'd absolutely encourage you to. And if you're still unsure of what might make a story newsworthy, we have a selection of images up on the screen here, a selection of words. And these are the key things to telling your story. We consider impact. How big of a deal is your story? Journalists are going to want to know, how important is this to tell? What is the impact? Is this a small event that affects a large number of people? Is it a large event that affects a small number of people? Is it a large event that affects a large number of people? Consider that impact and the reality of it. Timeliness. I think we all know this. If it's not new, it is not news. Old stories can be reworked and reconsidered. However, there needs to be something new about them. If you have told your story to the media, it is told. It can be built on, but you can't really refresh and retell it as it has already been told. Consider novelty. Novelty talks to the unusual, the unexpected. What makes your story unique? Now, novelty doesn't have to be a gimmick or anything like that. It just is the uniqueness. Do you have something that is going to engage people and that sets you apart from everything else out there? Really key one is proximity. If it's a local story, talk to your local media. If it's an Australian story, talk to Australian media. If it's a global story, you start to talk to that. Consider the proximity and where the story is gonna hit. We love local angles. We always love to be able to take a global story and bring it down to the local, because that it continues to let it evolve, and it talks to that local community. Be considerate of who your audiences are and where they are. Currency, is it relevant to what's going on today? Conflict, the good versus bad. Now, it doesn't always have to be that way. Think about your two football teams coming up in the final. You've watched both of their stories and they're reaching that endpoint. There's conflict there. It's engaging. You want to know what's happening. So do you have various perspectives to talk to? Interest, consider your audience. You're talking to people. How is this story going to interest them? And then prominence. Prominence is one that we love. If you have a high profile person, extraordinary person, someone of note that is going to be newsworthy as well. So in a nutshell, consider all of these points. If you have 2 to 3 of these, that's where I sort of see the magic happening. So if you can land on a couple of them, it really does make for an interesting news story. Now, moving forward, I want to talk a little bit about, on the back of what we've just discussed now, you're really excited, you're ready to go, you've got your story, you know it's going to work. Now, here are some of the do's and don'ts of PR. We start at the top of the pyramid with a spokesperson. It's always very important to try and have someone available to speak, whether it be an expert in the area, whether it be the business owner, someone who is passionate about this area. If you do have a prominent person that you're putting out for a story, make sure that prominent person is available to the media. Talk about the brand. If you are promoting a brand, make sure you mention it every time you get asked a question. Try and mention the brand, get it back out there. One of the key things we often see in PR when people are being interviewed is they'll say it or we, and that's great. However, you're missing an opportunity to share your brand name. If you're working for the ugly Christmas sweater, mention it continually, the ugly Christmas sweater. If you're working for Nike shoes, mention Nike shoes. If you're working, whatever your brand is, mention that as often as you can. It might seem a little uncommon, out of character a lot of the time, but be confident and comfortable to mention it. And remember, the media will take grabs, they'll only take little pieces of what you're saying. Another really key thing ahead of all of this is to prepare. We will work with you and in drafting and helping you develop your materials, come up with the key messages, know exactly what you want to say. And if you have 10 interviews lined up that day, deliver your key messages in each of them. Say the same things. We see politicians do this really well all the time. They'll be asked a question, but they have a key message that they want to get through. They might acknowledge and thank the journalist for the question and then drive home a key message. We want to do the same thing, maybe not to that same extent sometimes. We want to be more considerate maybe, but at the same time, know those key messages, be prepared and rehearse them. And this is probably the most key one that I want to just get across today. Share as much as you can with the media. A lot of people are uncomfortable. If you have numbers or figures, if you're doing a financial story, share those finances if you can. Obviously, sometimes you're unable to, but holding back can detriment your opportunity for a story. If you have something new that's happening, that's great. However, in that same vein, if you have something new that isn't ready to go out at this point, but you're speaking to the media, don't share that because it's not ready to be shared yet. But key to this is sharing as much as you are able to with the media. And on the back of the do's, the don'ts. Just a couple of tips here, some things that we have seen over the years that haven't been so successful. Don't repitch the same story. I've sort of briefly touched on this just before. If you've gone out with a story to the media and you've sold it, you need to have something new. You need to have something current. You need to have something that builds on it. If you've released a product last month and gone out with it and you just want to have a crack at re-releasing it, it's already out there. It exists. The media have already run that piece. It's going to be very hard to get a second round of uptake. Speak truthfully or don't tell lies. Lies will come back to bite you. There's always a bit of, people are always, want to sort of stretch that truth, say a little something differently. It's important when you're speaking with the media, know that this will be written down, recorded. It will exist forever. So don't tell lies. It will come back to bite you. And on the back of the sharing piece, and I've sort of touched on this just before as well, don't overshare. If you cannot share information, obviously share as much as you are able to, but if you cannot, you might have something in the pipeline or new data or research that isn't quite there yet. An example that we're seeing at the moment around oversharing comes to the COVID vaccine. I think I've heard about 10 15 different COVID vaccines that are going to change the game. They're going to help everybody out. And then they've gone quiet. People are sharing things that aren't ready yet. Yes, there's excitement there, but it's so much more devastating when it doesn't work. So just be aware of that as well. And consider the media. Don't go to the wrong media outlets. Bosco actually touched on this just before as well. If you have a fashion story, why on earth would you pitch that to a technology or a finance journalist? It's not quite right for them. So just being really aware, when you go out to the wrong media, it can sort of turn them off a little bit. They're like, have you done your research? Do you know who we are? You haven't considered us. So be considerate. The journalist that you're talking to at the other end is a person. They're a journalist. They're someone that will engage. They have things that they're interested in as well. So just consider that as well. And on the back of that, I always love to give some tips out and help people out. So I love this slide as well. Just a little roadmap to media engagement. Building what we have talked about, just before, speaking to the media. When you have a story, you're really proud of it, you're excited about it, you want to share it, you need to consider the journalists and media outlets. Who are the appropriate media targets? If you have a great story and you send it to all the wrong people, they're not going to run it. But if you send it to the right people, you call the right people, you share it with them, they're going to get excited about it as well. So just being really considerate about those media targets. Specialization. I know this is banging on a little bit, but the same thing. Know the work that those key journalists do. If you're reaching out to a newspaper or a television station and you have a health story, for example, focus on the health journalists, the people who are going to be writing about that. Maybe research. I always recommend if you can research and look at some of what they've written about. Is your story similar? Does it build on something they've done in the past? If you know that, you're setting yourself up for success. We talk to the pitch, and this is an area we love as well. At Elevate, we love the pitch on behalf of our clients, but how do we pitch the story? Today, we have seen this shift continually. The media landscape has changed and changed and continues to do so. Throughout COVID, pitching changed again. We need specialized, tailored pitches. You need to be really considerate of how you are positioning your story. What separates it? Bringing those news values back again. Are you pitching it via email? That's great. But is it enough? Do you need to phone? Do you need to, follow up? Do you need to provide more? Do you have images? How are you pitching the story? Provide the media and people out there with as much information as you have and that they can share. We then would talk to Bosco and his team as well, and we would build on that. Can this pitch evolve? Can we share it maybe digitally? Is there something else we can do to grow this piece? Consider the pitch your opportunity to jump on that microphone and shout it loud. On the back of that, we go to approach. Look, I've mentioned it. Journalists are humans too. They are people. These are busy people. These are people with jobs. These are people often with multiple deadlines. And newsrooms are shrinking. So they're oftentimes working on so many different stories. So make it as easy as possible for them. Give them all they need. If they need an interview, ensure that's lined up for them and work to their time. Don't try to muck them about too much. That can kill stories. Provide images. If they need vision, set up a visual opportunity that they can get to easily. Make it work for them. The easier you make it work for the people that you're pitching to, the better your opportunity is going to be. This next piece, rapport, is probably something that I have spent most of my career doing and something that is so important and often overlooked. Build a relationship. If you have a friendly journalist, someone you know, you can ask them, is this right? Will this get up? Where should we put it? Know the people, engage with them, go out for coffee with them, out for dinner, whatever it is, know these people. Everyone on the other end of that phone or the other end of your email is a person. Build rapport, get to know them. It never hurts. It only sort of can benefit you. And then as discussed just with the approach, the package, give them everything they need. If you know they need photos, videos, anything like that, provide it. Make it as simple as possible. If you give them everything gift wrapped and it's set right in front of them, you're much more likely to get a run than if you give them nothing. And look, just on the back of this, I would love to know exactly like Bosco say. If you have any questions about this, pop it in our chat box. Yeah. But yeah, I always love to end with a few tips, Bosco. I know you do too, so I'll throw it for yourself. Give some of those digital insights.
Yeah, so I'll give you some personal tips and I'll give you some Elevate tips as well. So from a personal perspective, just remember that it's all about the human journey. And as people in marketing, we get invested in your message. We get invested in the journey that you're on, because we're part of that journey as well. And I look back at the Ugly Christmas Sweater Party as a great campaign, because I spent 3 years of my life growing this. And so we get personally invested as well. So don't forget about identifying what your values are and what the purpose of your brand is, and then making sure that lives on through your marketing, through your message, to the people that represent that brand. And at Elevate, the biggest tip is, we're humans too. We wanted to also provide our contact information as well. Don't be afraid to send us an email. We're
ask questions,
send us a message. If you've got friends or other business people that want to talk to us or pick our brain, we'd love to hear from you as well. The one thing that really impressed me about Elevate Communication is when you go on our website, you see the human faces, and you can contact any of us as well. So don't be afraid to do that in the future as well. And that's my tip for marketing right now.
No, look, love it. And I think exactly, just building on that, remember, it does come back to this people thing. And like we are, like the journalists are, you are also people. So tell your human stories, add that in there as well. And remember, when you do speak with journalists and things like that, from the moment you start talking to them, they are interviewing you. That's always my biggest tip. There's nothing off the record in 2020, so just always be aware of that as well. Look, Elevate, we love to provide a whole range of services. We do digital, we do PR, we do media training, we do everything. So we are always interested in chatting with you guys about that. If you have any questions, please do give us a shout. There's our details there. Jump on the website. You'll find the phone number and everything there as well. But please get in touch.
And the future of marketing is integrated. So PR, communication, 100%. Digital, it all speaks together. We all work together. And so moving forward, it's time for you to customize your campaigns and your marketing message in a holistic way moving forward as well. So we're going to stop our share. You guys can turn on the camera now. And we're going to go through some questions as well. So I just had some feedback here. Thank you for everybody that joined on the call as well. It says here, our worst part is number 7, which is the creative and all the steps thereafter. Right. So creative is a very complicated situation, because at the end of the day, we're speaking to creative in so many different formats: audible, visual. If you don't have access to this, it's really important to either build it or work with someone that can help get you there. So when it comes to creative, the most important thing is accessibility and resources. And we'd be happy to chat with you when it comes to creatives as well, because that's something that we spent a lot of time looking at and also building as well.
And I think the creative evolves. You get it right, but you continue to evolve it. Like everything else. So creative is an ongoing process. Get it right up front and then allow it to grow.
Right. So I think what we're going to do now is, we've completed the seminar or the webinar as far as how to develop your content strategy. We really want to get to know you as well. So we noticed that we have a few of our esteemed followers as well. If you guys want to just ask us questions, feel free to turn on your camera. We'd love to have you on board and just pick your brain. So if anyone on here would like to ask us a quick question or two, or Jeremy as well, if you have a question that's popped up, feel free to throw it in and we'd be happy to answer them for you. Yeah.
Please go ahead. I'll run through a few questions.
Sure.
Come through, if that's okay. If you guys want to mute yourself.
Yeah, for sure. We'll put ourselves on mute.
Okay, so what are some of the key metrics, Bosco, to look for when analyzing the performance of a website?
That's a very good question. Can you hear me, Jeremy? Okay, so the first step for looking at the performance of the website, it goes beyond traffic. I look at things like the bounce rate, and the bounce rate is the rate of how long someone is staying on your website before they leave. I look at your conversion and your call to action. So let's just say you have 1,000 visitors that come to your website, and you have, let's say, 100 of those people that do something on your website. You're looking at about a 10% conversion. And so for me, that tells me, okay, you have some form of conversion. However, you may also could have some areas that you could improve on. So then I would look at your call to actions. But a really big test, and this is something I encourage everybody to do, and I think we actually did this with someone who's attended our webinar today, is what is the one thing you want me to do when I land on your website, and where on the front fold of that website do you tell me to do that? So if you have a website that says, welcome to my brand, and I land on that, that's not necessarily a call to action that I would want to go with. So the key message, the key call to action should be right there as soon as I land, because 60% of traffic, sometimes 50% of traffic, don't even scroll down when they get to a website. So you have 30 seconds to make that first impression. It's almost like walking into a shoe store and not having any shoes on display.
Yeah.
Right? You're hoping that they'll find the shoe. You're hoping they'll go there and get the shoe. It doesn't work that way. Tell me what you want me to do so that I can do it. So when it comes to a website, the first thing I look at is what is the path that you're taking me on and what is my experience? And then that tells me what the metrics are going to look like. Sometimes I can even predict the metrics based on me landing on a website. What do you look for when you go on a website?
Look, I'm exactly the same thing you were just talking about there. And I was just thinking about Google.
Right.
Google, it tells you what to do. There's a search. You search through Google. That's all that's on that website.
Right.
Google and search. Simplicity, ease of access, and an understanding. I think the thing I find most strange when websites are so full of things, but you don't actually know what they do. It's just real clarity and real, simplicity of use, I think, as well.
Yeah. Jeremy, you got another question for us? Feel free to throw it our way.
Sure do. So what are your thoughts on user-generated content?
Right. So user-generated content is something that you can't control sometimes because at the end of the day, it has different narratives. So what I like to do when it comes to user-generated content is, number one, be upfront and acknowledge that it is user-generated content.
Definitely.
And that way, the brand there's a big difference between the brand message and how the sentiment is around people. And most brands will let people debate and comment and go back and forth, but they will not necessarily get involved. They will have their standard messaging. And this is where, I guess, media training comes into play. So maybe you can talk a little bit about this too.
Yeah, look, I think this is a very interesting topic, particularly in the media, and particularly if you are a person or a brand that you're personally involved with. People can engage you and it can become sometimes offensive or sometimes really exciting, and you want to respond to them. Now you have to understand, are you speaking on behalf of your brand? Are you speaking as an individual? Sometimes it's really important to liaise with that user-generated content, to liaise with what people are saying. Always take it on board. If you are getting feedback, always take feedback on board. If you're learning new things, if people are asking for things, provide that, I guess, all of that. But if it's not worth engaging with, if it is someone that's trying to press your buttons or something like that, again, be very considerate about how you do it. Actually, just this week in the news, Mumbrella announced that they were no longer going to have comments, positive or negative, displayed on any of their articles. That's quite interesting in 2020, and I'll be definitely interested to see how that plays out. But I think, look, when people want to provide you with content, when they do come at you and give you things, look at it, consider it, but be very considerate if it is worth engaging with, if it is appropriate to engage with, or if it is there for some other reason.
Right. And we're living in a world right now where you can't control the narrative, and nor should you. No. If someone believes in something, it's not our place to change that. But having said that, what you can control is your narrative and your message. And sometimes user-generated content can impact traffic, it can impact engagement. Whether the sentiment is positive or negative, digital activity or activity in general is happening, which in some worlds is a good thing. Sometimes you hear about a brand because of a negative story.
Yeah.
Sometimes you hear about a brand salvaging their brand reputation after something happened. Last night I was watching the news and they were talking about how Ellen made a public apology, and some people thought it was too much, too little, too late. But at the end of the day, the brand is still at top of mind. So whether the sentiment is positive or negative, it's your opportunity as a brand to leverage that to your advantage.
And I think just on that as well, key messaging and your tone of voice and all of those things, knowing all of that and getting it right and keeping that consistent when you do respond or engage is very important. If you're a very positive brand, you've got to ensure that that language remains positive and that it is it fits within your narrative. Know your key messages at the end of the day. That's what I will always come back to. Know your key messages and your call to action. If you can get your call to action in there as well, respond with that. Get that everywhere. Get that brand out there as far as I'm concerned.
All right, Jeremy, hit us up with another question. We'll take another one if we have time for it.
Yeah, sure thing. So this is one from Mark. So how do you know when a story meets newsworthy test in your experience?
That's a really good question. I think we have to consider so many different things when looking at stories to see if they are newsworthy. We look at all those news values. We look at why it might be newsworthy. We look at where we're wanting to place it as well. So some stories that might not necessarily appear newsworthy on a broad scheme might have a real newsworthiness to a trade or a specific target. So we look at those different things as well. So newsworthiness is a broad area, but it has to have some of those key pieces. Is it relevant? Is it timely? Is there impact? Or, you know, any of the sort of 8 or so, you know, reasons, newsworthy values are all really important there as well. Do you have prominence? I guess a couple of the real key things, if you are looking for something, timing is really important. Having something to offer is really important. And then being able to back up any claims and ensure that it is relevant and important to people. All of those things are very important. But again, just consider your audiences. Is the piece exciting to a wider group of people? Is there impact? Is there a news story there? And ask the question. We can always look at it and go through it with you to understand if there is some news value there.
That's a good response. Jeremy, one more question?
Yeah, last one. What are some of the segments you can recommend to use when tagging your database of clients or potential clients?
What are some of the segments? Oh, that's a great one. So there's different ways of segmenting your data. You can look at it from a behavioral perspective. You can look at it from an acquisition perspective. You can look at it from an activity perspective. I think there's different ways of how you could approach this. What I like to create as a guideline is, what would you like the audience to do? So are you trying to reactivate someone that hasn't paid attention to you in a while? Have you sent messages to this person and it just hasn't really resonated with them? Is it based on activity? Is it based on timing? Have you got the right email? And so segmentation of data is complex. And I think we could do a complete webinar just on that topic. But I think the best tip I can give when it comes to segmentation is, what is the behavioral data? Can you find trends? Is it based on activity? Is it based on interest? Is it based on engagement? More importantly, how have you acquired this email, and how often have you messaged them? Are you messaging them too much? Have you messaged them too little?
Yeah.
You know, the one mistake that many brands make is they make a quick decision based on that first marketing activity. So here's a great example. We've run a webinar today. We plan to do these webinars a lot more in the future. Now, today we tested an 8 o'clock time zone. Most companies would be like, oh, you know, not many people showed up, let's not do that. But smart marketers will go, no, let's record this webinar. Let's email it to our database and say, hey, did you happen to miss the webinar? Here's a recording. By the way, here's a slide deck off the presentation. Yeah. And more importantly, it's now on our blog. So what we've done is we've exhausted all options to present our content. We've put our content in different areas, and we've considered that the audience might not have woken up at 8 o'clock, or they're getting to work at 8 o'clock in the morning. So let's remember, going back to what we said earlier, every day is launch day. And so when it comes to marketing, you have to consider your audience. And, you know, if someone failed to show up or couldn't make it or signed up for something, that's okay. Life happens. Our role is to give them all the accessibility points so they can attain that information. And while I'm finishing up on this, there's a question I can see from the chat here from one of our esteemed stakeholders that says, are stock images on your website something of the past, and what will you recommend to use? That's a really good question, actually. What are your thoughts before I start?
Look, this is a hard one. I think there's always a place for stock images. And you know, it's important, I guess, that the stock images fit with what you're presenting and fit within the brand as well. So I think there's always a place for them. I do also always recommend unique imagery and anything like that as well, where possible. But it's the reality. We live in a world that, you know, these images are available and there's a massive range. So just being very considerate about the stock images that you use. and the reasons for them.
Yeah, and I think find opportunities to show your human side. So if you work in an office space that that could be in need of some interior design, that's okay. As you can tell, we have a strategy session at the back. We have our lovely banner here, but we wanted to show you our human side. And so, if you have an opportunity to book a photo shoot or have the ability to do a photo shoot for your team members, or you have a nice photograph of your team member that, they're writing a blog on, share your human elements as best as possible. And don't forget, you have social media for that particular perspective. There's so many creative ways where you can tell a story through a photograph, even if it is from a small, tight angle and you don't want to worry about the rest of the room. And we live in a digital age today where you can do so much with photography, and we're blessed to have our own people here like Jeremy as well, who, this is what he does. He takes videos and photography and tells a story from it. So if you ever have any visual content, and you're calling us for ideas, ask for Jeremy as well. But more importantly, don't forget to tell the story, because at the end of the day, that is the human element. So our stock image is a thing of the past, yes and no. I think it really just depends on how human you are. So let's change that question and go, how human is your brand? All right. And I think that covers pretty much all the questions. If for whatever reason you had some questions outside of this, feel free to email us.
Please do.
Send us a message. We'd love to hear from you as well. We will be doing a lot more of these. We will be posting the recording of this video as well. If you have any friends, colleagues, businesses, people that could benefit from this, let them know that this is going to be something that we're going to be doing a lot more of. We've got a podcast that we're also going to be reviving a new season with. So at Elevate Communication, we're all about being as human as possible and bringing you some more exciting things down the pipeline.
There's our phone number.
Yeah, as well. So I'd like to thank everyone for your time today. We'd like to wish you well as well. And for everyone that could join us live, we really, really appreciate it. I see a comment here that says more, please. So absolutely, we hear you. And if there's any topics or areas that you'd like us to cover in the future, let us know. And we'd love to bring us to your living room in the future.
Absolutely. And look, if you do have any questions, do send them through. That might even inspire a second webinar based on what you share with us. So yeah, look, thank you all for taking the time. We really appreciate it. And we hope you enjoyed what we were able to give you, and hope you got some value out of it as well.
Have a lovely morning.
Thanks so much.